are Buddhist. And they look at the Catholics as French collaborators. They're helping the French out. And so his government was already in trouble. And then he was very corrupt. The United States is going to give him hundreds of millions of dollars for building up the South Vietnamese military. He's going to keep. There's a lot of nepotism. All the key government positions went to his family members. Very corrupt government. Well, we're kind of stuck with it because we said don't have elections. Well, soon a civil war would start in South Vietnam, and eventually the group we have to get is called the National Liberation Front. And the National Liberation Front are going to be the people fighting against Diem and the Southern government. Remember, the U.S. supports the Southern government. The National Liberation Front won Vietnam. Now, Diem, or what's going to be then, is a civil war in South Vietnam. And that's what the United States is going to get involved in. The Vietnam War will be the U.S. getting involved in the Civil War to try that Southern government. And Diem, to terrify the Americans, or to make sure that we got that communist connection, labeled them as the Vietnamese communists, or kind of a bastardization of the Vietnamese, Viet Cong. And that's where Viet Cong comes from. That's the National Liberation Front. Now, the North helps them. Actually, the North kind of basically leads them from the North. But at first, their fighters are all Southerners. They're all in South Vietnam. President Eisenhower at first gave money, but then in 1959 started sending U.S. troops to train the Southern Army and help them. The first American casualties will be in 1959. Yeah.
So what was the Viet Cong?
The Viet Cong is the National Liberation Front, which means Vietnamese communists.
So it's just like a symbol for it.
Yeah, that's a name. The Viet Cong basically means Vietnamese communists. That's where the term comes from. And those are the people fighting against the Southern government. The North is basically and so the U.S. starts sending advisors, the North starts sending advisors, and that is the situation going into the 1960s. But the thing is, remember Truman Doctrine thinking. It's all being directed from the Kremlin, and if South Vietnam falls, who's next? Yeah, Philippines, Japan, Hawaii. And they actually talked about defending the coast of California from attack because of this, which is crazy talk. Yeah.
So the U.S. sending troops to this?
Advisors. There were troops, but they were advisors to help train the South Vietnamese army against the Viet Cong. And so that is the situation in Vietnam, South Vietnam, and when Eisenhower left office. A couple more things in that are going on around the world. 50s, amazing time. I love the 50s. The Suez Crisis happened while this is going on. It's also called the Sinai War in 1956. And there's a great connection between this and Iran. Remember Mossadegh? Mossadegh was that democratically elected premier of Iran that the U.S. overthrown. A man who idolized Mossadegh in Egypt was a man named, Gavril Nasser. Gavril, he actually was not a Democrat. He was a dictator. But he wanted to make Egypt independent. They've been dominated by the English since the 1880s. And the most valuable thing in Egypt is the Suez Canal right there. The tolls collected of that were huge. The problem was all the tolls went to Britain and France, who refused to make a deal much like British Petroleum did back in 1952 in Iran. So Nasser nationalized the canal. I didn't write that down. So Nasser nationalized that canal, and Britain and France were furious. But there's one more country involved to nationalize canal. Israel, right here, was a brand new country that won its independence in 1948, basically carved themselves out of the British colony of Palestine. Well, mandate. They took the Ottomans. Yeah,
So who was Nasser?
Nasser was the new president but dictator of Egypt.
Okay.
He nationalized the canal. He idolized Mossadegh. Israel just won their independence 8 years earlier. And Israel was weak, surrounded by enemies who look at Israel as more imperialist. As they saw it, as more Europeans taking over. And they never really made peace. So Israel, who only had one real friend in the world, who supplied them with most of their weapons, at this time one friend, they unified with Britain and France and attacked Egypt. By the way, who's Israel's only friend? You can probably guess that they unified with them, France. The reason why France felt guilty for their complicity in the Holocaust when Germany occupied them. And so for about 20 years, France really helped them. The U.S. was no friend of Israel at this time. If you know anything about policy today, it's even weird to think about it. As everybody running for president goes out of the way to say that we'll do whatever Israel wants. It's actually really amazing what has happened. But they attacked Egypt, yeah.
All three of them?
Yeah, all three. What happened was basically this. Israel claimed that Egypt was going to attack. They attacked. Britain and France said, oh, we must protect the canal. It was all a scam. They were organizing themselves to attack. So Britain and France could get the canal back, and Israel could knock Egypt down a step to feel more protected. You know, Israel now is like a mini super. Back then, they were much more moderate. Well, the United States was furious. The U.S. was furious by this action. Remember CENTO? Remember that pact I told you about yesterday? They've been working to get allies in the Arab and Middle Eastern world against communism, and this is going to infuriate them. And so the United States, showing how it's changed so much since World War II, they told Britain, France, and Israel, you better get out of here. Get out of the Sinai. Let Egypt do this. This was a big deal when the U.S. did that. But it also shows how things have changed. Before World War II, Britain and France would have done whatever they wanted. After World War II, they weren't strong enough anymore because the U.S. was relatively so much stronger. And Britain, France, and Israel left. This would add to a toppling of the French government. And Israel's going to not feel safe. And they would do a surprise attack 11 years later against the three neighboring countries. Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. And I didn't put this down. Please write down the Eisenhower Doctrine. The Eisenhower Doctrine. And the Eisenhower Doctrine would come out of this, but also a potential civil war in Lebanon. Remember the Truman Doctrine? Basically, the Eisenhower Doctrine is taking the Truman Doctrine to the Mideast. The U.S. will stop or help whatever government is willing to stop communism. The Eisenhower Doctrine. Whatever government will stop communism. And so you combine this with the alliances, and you're getting the U.S. being where? Also in 1956, Hungary. It happened at the same time as the Suez Crisis. Behind the Iron Curtain, yeah.
Why did the U.S. want Britain, France, and Israel to stop?
The U.S. wanted Arab allies against communism. And the word Britain, French, and the Israeli action would alienate Arabs and make countries like Iraq become allies with the Soviet Union. So, Hungary. After World War II, the Stalinist government created in Hungary was the most repressive behind the Iron Curtain. And in 1956, encouraged by the United States through radio broadcasts called Radio Free Europe, high frequency radio station, the U.S. encouraged Hungary to overthrow, well, not really overthrow, but to change governments to a much more moderate socialist government. And while that's going on, Hungary actually began to break away from the newly created Warsaw Pact. Remember the Warsaw Pact? Hopefully that term is familiar. That's what the Soviets created to counter NATO. the Warsaw Pact. Here's a statue of Stalin that the head was cut off and the nose was munched when they pushed it off. Big statue. Stalin had statues of him everywhere. Everywhere. And when he was denounced in 1959, they kind of secretly took down almost all the statues and melted them. So it's really hard to find a statue of Stalin. So the statue I have in my front yard, one of the few. Yeah.
So why? So the U.S. encouraged them to have like less.
Yeah, the U.S. basically encouraged them to break away from Soviet domination.
All right.
And so we acted like we encouraged it. Well, let's get to it. So they broke away. While the Suez Crisis is raging, the Soviets, along with help from the Poles and the East Germans, invaded. Here, those are actually Polish tanks. Remember, they're behind the Iron Curtain now, so it's a communist government. That's a Soviet T-54 tank. They invaded, and that's in Budapest. There are Hungarian civilians throwing rocks at them. Oh, hundreds of Hungarians would be killed. But the Soviets would take over again. They would put a less repressive government, but they totally destroyed this coup. A similar thing would happen in Czechoslovakia 12 years later. The Hungarians have never really forgiven the United States because the U.S. encouraged them, and then when the Soviets invaded, to reestablish their control, what did the U.S. do? Yeah. Music shift. You always know something's going to happen, right? Yeah, they've never forgiven the U.S. The U.S. did not intervene. The U.S. was unwilling to risk World War III. Now, we can look at that and say, yeah, I mean, really, you want to blow the world up for Hungary? Not for the Hungarians might say, yeah, that's our home. But that shows you how complex the world is. Are you really going to do things that are going to like create revolutions elsewhere? Are you really going to help? Are you really going to risk World War III? Really? It shows how dangerous the Cold War was. It shows you combine Hungary, but also the Suez Crisis, Hungary, Vietnam, the things that the CIA did, and brinksmanship. There's no easy answer to this. The world is a very complex place. And so if you go to Budapest today, there's a great museum, kind of their history that goes, the history of Hungary, Hungary, the Treaty of Versailles on, and they still hate the Treaty of Versailles too. And they make it clear they are still mad at the Americans. They have a fascist government now, which is kind of terrifying. Well, then in '57, Sputnik. The Soviets launched the first satellite. I mean, it really seemed that the Soviets are winning everywhere. Now, the satellite was no bigger than, or a little bit bigger than a basketball, which, by the way, for dress-up day, be a great costume, wouldn't it? It had a little radio transmitter that just beeped. That's all it did. And it had such a low orbit, you could hear it on radios on the surface of the Earth. It went over, it was directly over, and you could see it go across the sky. And the orbit was so low, eventually it degenerated and burned up in the atmosphere. Think about it. They put a satellite up. It made it look like the Soviets are winning this, not only winning the Cold War, but more importantly, here's the rocket. It's not a very big rocket, and that's what I liked. But they have a rocket that's strong enough to propel a satellite into space. They have a rocket that's strong enough to do what? Yeah, become a missile on a ballistic target, carry a nuclear weapon to the U.S. Bombers, it would take hours to attack the United States. A missile, intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM, 30 to 45 minutes. Now, this created panic. Once again, it just seemed like we're losing the Cold War. This headline has it, panic. Russian victory. Eisenhower at first is like, nothing to worry about. And I'll tell you why he was so complacent in just a second. He did not realize how scared of that, especially when they could see it go over their head. They could see weapons. They have this idea maybe there'd be a satellite with nuclear weapons that could be in geocentric orbit and just fire immediately. As it turned out, that's relatively impractical, but people thought those kind of things. And Eisenhower then announced, well, there was a Navy and Army team competing to build rockets. They thought they'd competition would make them go faster. And Eisenhower realized that people are scared. Okay, well, the Navy team is ready to launch a satellite. So don't worry. Nobody was more surprised by that announcement than the Navy. They had no idea. They were not ready. They thought, we can't do it. And so they had to do it. So they launched theirs. And there it is. It made up about 1 foot, then the rocket blew up. So we look even worse. And you can see the inevitable headline. Oh, what a flopnik, yeah. Okay. Out of this, 2 big things happen. First off, the Navy and Army team, all rock space research would be put under the umbrella of one agency, NASA. What does NASA stand for? Do you know? I'll give you a hint. The N stands for national. Aerospace. Aeronautical.
No, Space Association.
Administration. National Aeronautical and Space Administration, NASA. And so all coordinate there, get a satellite, and then get a man in the space, and then go from there. But the important thing about NASA is tied at the hip to the Defense Department. You know, you work on missiles to get a satellite into space, you now have a missile to carry a nuclear weapon. You get a satellite up into space for a satellite up in space as a spy satellite. So NASA to this day is tied to the hip to the Defense Department. Basically, NASA is a part of the Defense Department in so many ways. So that's part of it, which would become a major advancement. But the other one was this. Remember that Scopes monkey trial and the trial about teaching evolution in schools back in 1925 in Tennessee? Well, in reality, especially in high schools, almost every state, they just backed away from real teaching of science because it was so controversial. But now it looked like the Soviets were ahead in science education. And so this would create the first real federal government initiative to help public education in science. I mean, heck, you have to go back to the Enabling Act of 1803, where they gave the sale of public land to schools. Now, the federal government would step in. Now remember, Roosevelt wanted this, Truman wanted this, but it's going to take Sputnik to get it done. And the federal government's going to have a very mixed history, mixed connection to public education. Something's very good. Some things I would argue have been not either not helpful or actually detrimental to education. If you have any siblings who have taken the 8-hour smart or going to take the 8-hour smarter balance test,
8 hours?
yeah, you guys are so lucky.
Wait, why?
1st or 8th grade, they now have an 8-hour test.
When did they take it?
I think they take it in like 2 weeks.
Like 1st graders?
1st or 8th. Yeah. And juniors they were supposed to do it last year, but the computer system went down. It was just a disaster. It was a disaster all over the country, mandated by the federal government. And the state of Montana decided to throw that out for you guys, and that's why they did the ACT. ACT is a horrible test to decide proficiency in high school. It's not designed for that. But it's better than an 8-hour test online. That would have been, oh my God, that everyone is just awful. So be glad you're out of elementary school. That's all mandated by the federal government, and I'm not a fan of standardized tests. Even though they well, so ironically though, one of the big things was, and you might have noticed it with this picture right here, that guy holding Sputnik with the Kremlin crown. There's Stalin, right? Stalin was dead. Stalin died in 1953. He had a stroke. The impossible happened. I will tell you what happened to Stalin's body. Don't let me forget. I'll tell you the story about his death. But, yeah.
What did you say for science on that last slide?
The federal government started helping, giving money for the teaching of science, especially in high school and college. The U.S. has already given a lot for scientific research.
heck, almost every major scientific invention would be through some federal government largesse. Almost every single one, and the government doesn't fund anymore as much, and our science has dropped. Internet, government. Partially, so we have a computers tied together in case of nuclear war, but that would eventually turn into the internet. Well, Nikita Khrushchev won a power struggle between 3 other of Soviet's or Stalin's cronies to take power. Khrushchev, this very, very almost bullying, yelling, screaming. But Khrushchev wanted to save the Soviet Union. He wanted to reduce the arms race because all this money was going through weapons and the Soviet economy was in shambles, especially after World War II. The Soviet economy they needed to quit spending so much on weapons. So even though Khrushchev wanted Sputnik to make the Soviets more equal to the United States because the US had such a huge advantage in nuclear weapons and bombers, which are now missiles. Well, here he is speaking at the United Nations, talking about the Soviet Union will be the future of the world. And to emphasize his point, he brought a shoe to bang it on the podium. A lot of people believe he took off his shoe. No, he just carried an extra one, like all people should. Well, not only that, at the end of the decade, Eisenhower wanted to make peace too. Eisenhower wanted to lead his second term as the general who actually brought a more peaceful world. Eisenhower wanted some kind of ending of the arms race too. The whole thing about the new look was to cut defense spending. So you have this weird situation where the new leader of the Soviet Union and Eisenhower are thinking on the same vein. In 1959, Khrushchev even went to the United States and saw a cow. Actually, he was supposed to be here for a couple of days and ended up staying for 2 weeks. Went all the way across the U.S. from the East Coast to, here he is in the brand new Disneyland in California. Yeah.
So Khrushchev wanted to...
Khrushchev wanted to limit the arms race.
Okay.
Less spending on defense, could start building their economy up. And the plan was for a summit in Paris in 1960. And this summit would actually talk real arms control, especially all those open atmospheric testing of nuclear weapons. You know, they're blowing all of these weapons up. In fact, in '59, both the US and the Soviets quit doing it as a moratorium against this. I mean, it looked like maybe after all these events, maybe part of the maybe peace. Part of the reason, maybe we'll live beyond 1965 and won't have World War III. Part of the reason Eisenhower wanted this is because he knew the US was significantly stronger in everything except for ground combat forces, and they weren't far behind there either. Why? Lots of reasons, but the biggie, a brand new spy plane that the US made very quickly in 1954 called the U-2. Now the U was kind of a code word. It means utility, just kind of to disguise what it really is. Think about a massive glider, huge wings that go on forever, and they're filled with fuel. This spy plane can get up to over 65,000 feet, way above Soviet air defenses. It can fly for 8,000 miles without being refueled. And its cameras were so precise that the pictures, you could read license plates from 65,000 feet. So these were incredibly advanced planes. And they flew over the Soviet Union over 3,000 times. Now, this is a total violation of every international law. If the Soviets did this to the United States, the US would go absolutely crazy. But they didn't. The thing was, Khrushchev said, if we want to go to Paris, no more U-2 flights. That's kind of, because they could see them on their radar, they just couldn't shoot them down. Huh? They couldn't get that high. You know, 70,000 feet, you have another 15,000 feet, and they'd be out almost out of the stratosphere. So, the CIA said, okay, that's fine, but we want one more flight. One more flight! Francis Gary Powers would be the pilot of the last flight flying out of bases of Iran. Shocking that we have bases in Iran, huh? Flying out of Iran while over Kazakhstan, which is in the Soviet Union, his engine went out. Kind of glided down, and as he tried to restart it, he got warning that a Soviet surface-to-air missile was tracking. Now these are big things. The idea was it would explode nearby, hoping the shrapnel would knock out the plane. They're massive, these missiles, SA-1s. Exploded nearby, Powers' plane was hit. Now, nobody thought you could survive bailing out at 70 or 65,000 feet. It didn't have an ejector seat, which you kind of need one to eject to get away from the exhaust. And so he had to scramble out of the canopy. In the process, broke his shoulder, or dislocated his shoulder, broke a collarbone. And then they gave him a pistol. What was the pistol? Kill himself. He was captured. He decided, he somehow got out. He wanted to live. Weirdo, huh? He was actually captured by a farmer. Last thing for today, the Soviets, that's him. See his arm in the sling? See it underneath that? I'll get a little bit to finish tomorrow.
So,
Well, as it turned out, the plane glided down to about 35,000 feet. So, but that's still really high. But he made it out and survived.
Just like, no one knows how?
Well, no, I mean, people have ejected from 35,000 feet. Yeah. Yeah, with parachutes.
Wait, do you have one?
He had a parachute, but he didn't have an ejector seat.
Yeah. Oh.
And the thing was,
I was like she didn't have a parachute.
the ejector seat will shoot him up about 150 feet, so you get away from the exhaust. Because like the propeller plane, they would throw the canopy up and just try to bail out. Well, now you got that exhaust. But by the way, that's why, besides having bad eyes, why I couldn't be a pilot.
That sounds like.
I'll tell you later. But that's why I could never be a jet pilot. Because if I did the ejector seat, it'd rip my feet off. Yeah, actually, my feet are one size too big, and I'm about two inches too tall.
Eventually,
And actually, around about 6 inches.
I think I'm gonna just nails with that.
Yeah. Put that back on. Okay, that's fine.
I've kind of been attacked.
Wanted to be a pilot.
You want to be a pilot?
I did.
sometimes there's
I went through the entire thing to go to the Air Force Academy. Went through the entire thing.
Oh. The award I got. I don't know.
Right, right. Oh, homeless.
Should I say it? Are you sure it's supposed to go to
Like,
Hannah?
about like.
Huh?
See,
Yeah.
I'm
Never mind. No, I didn't know. I did not get that at all. I was saying.
It's like this ongoing like cycle where they just like,
Oh.
I brand.
And then I was like, should you go to Hannah?
Yeah.